Hello, Edward here from Zero88. In this session, we're going to be talking about using flex range lighting consoles with limited programming time. So imagine you've come with your console into the venue and you've got to make a show happen and you haven't got a lot of time to do it in. That's what we're going to be looking at today. So basically trying to squeeze the most out of the features in the console and use them in the quickest and most effective way, even if you've got a really short amount of time to actually get your console ready to run a particular event or production. So what we can see here is I'm currently running Phantom ZerOS. ZerOS, that's the software that runs on all of our consoles, such as the Flex range and also some other consoles that we make and used to make as well, all running the ZerOS software platform. I'm emulating a Flex console at the moment. I'm emulating a Flex on my laptop. And on the left-hand side of my screen, that's what I would see on my Flex external monitor. Top right, I've got capture visualization software running. So that's going to allow us to see what we're doing and see what we're programming as we go through. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be kind of going through today is quite a lot of it will be tips and suggestions. And in a lot of cases, there won't really be a right or wrong way of doing things. So a lot of this is a lot of just tips and suggestions. And you will be able to find if you try and give this a practice, or you actually go to a real life scenario of this and you have a very limited amount of time to program, you'll kind of find out and you'll work out your workflow and what works for you. But I'm just going to go through, and we'll go through some tips and suggestions, and some of which you might decide, oh, I'll pick that one, I'll use that. Oh, that's a good idea, I'll use that. Or actually, you might think, well, I quite like the way I do something, so I'm going to stick with that. Any kind of tips that you do have that I kind of go through today, any tips you have, put them in the comments, because that will help others as well if they're also using the console in the same kind of situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear everything. I'm going to clear everything from my console, and that will allow us to kind of work through that process of building up your kind of building blocks, if you like, to allow us to start to program our show. So I'm going to go to clear options, and I'm going to go and do a clear all. If you do clear all, that will remove all programming from your console. And that's now done. What it hasn't done is cleared my patch. So my patch is still here. I can view the fixtures currently patched in my fixture schedule. Now, if you're coming to a venue where you don't even know what the lights you're going to have, well, what options do we have there? Well, one of the options might be to use RigSync. If you're not familiar with RigSync, we've got some other sessions dedicated to RigSync, so go check those out. But what RigSync does, and if you go to Universes, you can see that there is a RigSync option here that I can enable. If I enable that, the console will look for any RDM devices connected to your console via DMX or ArtNet. So if you've got some, RDM fixtures, moving lights, LED kit, with RigSync enabled, the console will be able to discover them and patch them into your console automatically for you. And from then onwards, it will be able to keep them synchronized. So that is really going to save you some time. If you go to a venue, you don't know what the lights are, you don't even know, start to know what addresses things might be on. You might be able to let RigSync do the work. As I said, big caveat with that is you must make sure that the fixtures are indeed RDM enabled. If they're not, we'll need to do it old school, and you're going to need to go to add fixtures, find what lights you've got, and patch them in. Now, something you might want to think about doing is, if you haven't got all of the fixture information on a bit of paper and you're actually going to need to go round the venue or actually start to leave the console and find out what addresses fixtures are on, you might want to think about there and then getting a remote network set up so that you can remote into your console. So it will take a few precious minutes. If you've got limited programming time, it will use up a few of those precious minutes to get a remote set up. You know, plug in a router, configure the network settings. But it could save you a lot of toing and froing back and forth from the console. So you might want to consider setting up a remote network. That will allow you to use the apps on tablets, phones, and laptops to be able to actually remotely control the console and work through and remotely patch things in. So that's just something to think about. Now, when we've got our console all patched in, I'm going to come out of setup. Something that will be worth doing is just doing a bit of a kind of a flash through of your rig. So if you're on one of the smaller consoles, the FLX S consoles, well, you can quite happily just work through your channel faders to bring up the intensities of your lights. If you're on the full-size Flex, there's a good chance you'll be using a lot more lights. And so we can use a tool called Highlight. What you can do is if you select your first fixture, so I'm just going to type in 1 and then do a Shift and Home, that will bring Highlight into your command line if you're on the full-size Flex, and it will make your fixture number go yellow. The intensity percentage will go yellow into full. That light is now highlighting. I can now hold Shift and then use my left and right arrow keys to go next and previous through my lights. And I can now just go, I've got my Shift key held and I'm just literally tapping my right arrow key and I can step through my fixtures. And I can just make sure that I've got my patch right, fundamentally. That I can step through all of these fixtures, make sure that each of these lights, their intensity is coming on, they're not coming on in a magenta or pointing up into a ridiculous angle. You know, I can check that they're all configured how I need them to be, and I can just work through. And yep, I'm happy. Turn highlight off, you can either double tap clear, or you can do another Shift Home to turn highlight off. So, we're good. Our console's patched in, and we know the patch is right. Happy days. Let's dive in now and start to program up those building blocks. So this is where, first of all, take a look at your groups. So I'm going to go to my groups desktop here. Bottom right of your external monitor, you'll be able to access your groups on the external monitor. And I can go and automatically create groups. Now what the console will do is, working down this first column, the console will create a group for each different type of fixture. So I can go and select all of my washes, for example, or all of my spots. In the case here, I've got some LED cyc fixtures. Now, not only are these really good shortcuts to grab lights, and then we had to apply colour to those lights, but if I double click on a group, it will turn the fixtures in that group onto full. So it's also a really useful tool to start jumping in and grabbing lights and turning them on. Now, what I would start to do is I would then start to program up my own custom groups. So I would start to have a think about, okay, well, this is the fixtures I have in my rig. How do I want to start to control them? How do I want to kind of start to break it down into clusters? What lights am I regularly going to be using together? That's going to save you a lot of time in the long run. So I might, for example, say, and I'm actually going to go to my output window, I'm going to say that I want to use 1, 2, 5, 6, 9, 10. That's that selection I want to use regularly. I'm now going to tap record, go to my groups, scroll on down. I'm going to store that as a group. I'm going to go to my output window again, and I'm going to start to program up some more. Grab control of the lights I need. I'm going to record some more groups. This time I'm going to use a little bit of syntax. So maybe I want, for example, fixtures 34 and 40 and 46 and 52. Those are some spots kind of along the front, above the front of my stage. I'm going to record a group of those. And now maybe I'm going to have double tap clear 53 and what shall I have? 59 and 65 and 71, and I'm going to record that as a group. So you can start to build up your groups. Whatever works for you, it's your preference. Start to build up some different groups of lights you're likely to grab control of. And like we saw previously, I can now double tap on one of these groups and I can turn the lights in that group onto full. Starting to give myself some quick options here. When I've got the groups recorded in, you might then think about, okay, well, start to get yourself some intensity masters. So if you've checked out some of our other sessions, one of our sessions is all about mixing playbacks, mixing playbacks and mixing your different lighting control values. If you've seen that one, you'll be familiar that if you have manual intensity percentages, so by that, if I've gone in and manually pushed up faders or I've used syntax, I'm going to get red intensity percentages for that fixture. Now, a red intensity value has the highest priority on the console for that light. So if I now have a playback that I want to use to control those lights, well, it can't currently grab control of 2, 4 and 6 because their intensities are being controlled manually, and so it can't take control. So instead of using manual values to operate your show, it would be a really good idea, if you can, to use playbacks to control the intensities of your fixtures. So what you might want to do is essentially record a intensity playback for your kind of key groups that you might want to use. So I'm going to go and select, I'm going to double tap my wash fixtures, and yep, I'm going to regularly need the intensity of those lights. So I'm now going to record that onto my first playback. I'm going to double tap clear, and maybe I know, yep, I want to have my stage right spots, record that to the next one. I want to have my stage left spots, record that to the next one. You can see I'm starting to build up my options. I don't think I want those. I won't worry with those for now. I could always program them later. Yeah, I do want one for those, so I'm going to double click that, record next playback, and I do want these fixtures. Those are my front light. I'm going to need to get them positioned right, but that's the intensity I need for now. So now I've done that, if I go to my playbacks, I'm now starting to get myself different groups of intensities on my faders. And that's going to be really useful later on. It's going to be really useful for me to start to, when I start to go in and get some colour and position information on there as well. Before we go any further, have a think about whether there are custom default values that you could use for these fixtures. So when you double click fixtures, they're going to come on in that kind of default position, back to default, so 50% pan and tilt, and it's going to come on in a white. Actually, depending on your production, could there be a more useful thing that those lights do by default? You know, are you regularly needing them in a particular shade of blue, for example? Are you regularly using them in a particular position, for example? If so, it could be worth configuring that to be the fixture's default, so that you can just turn it on and it comes on ready in that colour and position, rather than going back to that standard default value. So that's just something to have a think about, is whether actually, for your particular production, whether custom defaults might be a route to go down, to save you having to always keep moving fixtures to a certain location all the time. There's some other sessions dedicated to customizing default values, so go check those out if you are interested. Now we've done that, we've got some intensity sorted, we've got some quick shortcuts to different groups and selections of lights in my groups window. Let's have a think now about actually diving in and looking at our fixture controls, so our attribute controls of colour, beam, shape and position. So I'm going to go to my Pallets desktop on my external screen. All of this, by the way, can be accessed on the internal. If I want to access the colour window, I can just hit colour, for example. So that's just worth bearing in mind. You can use the console completely without an external monitor if required. Equally, I mentioned about the remote apps earlier. I could view my Pallets desktop here on my iPad, for example. And so that would mean that I don't have to have a physical external monitor connected to my console. I could actually use a tablet instead. So I'm actually going to go in and I'm just literally going to go automatically create colours, automatically create beam, automatically create shape, and automatically create position. So I've just gone and generated all of the auto information for all of my currently patched fixtures. This is a really good place to start. So I can now use all of this to start to build up my different palettes that I might want to use. First place to start is position palettes. Really important. If we're limited on time, let's get ourselves some position palettes sorted out. So I'm going to go and grab all of my wash fixtures. I'm going to go to position. And let's start to move these fixtures out. I'm going to use the pan tilt grid, but of course you can use the encoder wheels instead. And I'm just going to start to record myself some custom positions. Now, you'll notice here I'm getting the situation where the record options window is now opened, it's in my way. If you want to prevent the record options window opening on your external desktop by default, which is particularly useful if you're doing exactly what I'm doing here and actually going and recording straight into the external window. Go to Setup, go to Settings, and I can actually go and say that I just want the record options to open when I hold the record button. I can now tap record and access my palettes. I'm just going to go and continue to build up some positions. I'm now going to hold shift and dial pan to get a fanned position. Tap record, record another palette. Hold shift, dial pan again, tap record, get another palette in there. You can see I'm just starting to build up these shortcuts, if you like, to different positions. I might then want to quickly go and grab my next set of lights. So let's just do my spot fixtures. These are rigged on their side, so I might want to just get them in a different custom position. I'm going to have those kind of downstage like that. They'll look good with a gobo in for later on. So I'm going to record that as a position. Now, I might want to start to lay out my palettes window in my own user preference. So maybe I want to start with the first few rows in here being one set of lights. But then a few rows down, I might want to start programming for this set of lights. So I actually might want to start from palette number 11 for this type of light. I'm then going to go and grab another set of lights. You can see I'm just starting to build up these different positions now, and it will be unique to your rig. This is my front light, really important one, because I'm probably going to be using this regularly, so I can get this position how I need it. I'm going to tap record and store that. Again, different type of light, so I might want to separate this out. Remember, of course, I can program multiple different lights into a single palette. Of course I can. I can have my wash fixtures and my spot fixtures in one position palette if I want to. I'm just segregating it out so that I can clearly see this is all my stuff for my washes, this is all my stuff for my spots, for example. You can do it differently. It's down to you. I'm just segregating it out in this case here. So now I've done that, I've just programmed some positions. And again, if you've got the time, spend all your time on the position palettes. That's a really good place to start, because that's just going to give you lots of your position shortcuts for your moving lights then. Now you've done that, something to have a think about is whether you want to record what I call snapshot palettes. So what I mean by that is, if I go and turn these fixtures on here, have a think about, is there a particular colour and position that you might want to use those lights in regularly? Because if there is, we can record everything about this lighting state on stage into a single palette. And I can do that by holding Shift and tapping record, and then choosing any empty palette type. I'm actually going to go and choose this into a beam palette. So I can do Shift record and record it into a beam palette. Or a position palette. What that will do for me is it means I can record absolutely everything about those fixtures into a particular palette. And that's really useful to be aware of. What else can I do here? Let me go to my groups. I'm going to double tap clear. I'm going to grab my alpha spots. I'm going to put them in a blue. I'm going to put them in a position. Actually, I'll put them in a gobo. And I'll put them in that position that I programmed. Let's brighten that up a little bit. Something like that. I'm now going to go and record that. And I can then store that into shape if I want to as well. Now you'll see, because I've recorded everything about that lighting state into my palette, I can go straight from those fixtures being homed straight to that palette, and absolutely everything is recorded in. To delete a palette, tap delete, tap the palette, and that will get rid of it. So you might want to do that. You might find that it's useful to actually go and build up some palettes that include absolutely everything, so that you can tap a palette and you know that all attributes of that fixture will go to that program value. What else should we take a look at? Something we can now look at is, when we've started to build up all of these various palettes, I'm going to go to my spots, or go to my washes. Rather than just tapping red and them snapping to red or blue, or equally the same might happen if I go and click on my different positions. Instead, I can actually apply a fade time to that. And so the next thing you might want to look at is using the programmer time function. If you tap your Z button on the console, the last encoder wheel is programmer time. And if you go and click the middle button of that encoder, or you go and click on its name on the touchscreen, that enables the programmer time. And that is a time in seconds. So I can now go in, and changes I make to the fixture will now happen over that time. Meaning that I can start to operate my show just directly from using these palettes. So if I want to adjust that time, I can use my encoder wheel to adjust that. Or if I want to, I can set up any empty playback fader to be a programmer time fader. So if I want to do that, I can go into the settings of one of my playbacks, either hold the setup key and tap a empty playback button, or just click on an empty playback in your faders window, and I'm going to go and choose programmer time and click OK. And I can now use my fader here to set the time in seconds. So now I've got some building blocks programmed in, I'm going to double tap clear. Notice how they also fade out using the programmer time. This is where I can now start to go in, and maybe I want to select my wash fixtures, I want them in a blue, and I'm going to have them in a program position. When I'm ready, I can then raise the intensity over the top. Remember, this fader here is just controlling their intensity. I can then start to mix a little bit with the different colours, and I can start to mix with my different positions as well. I can then go to my groups window. I could grab control of my spots. Maybe I then want to go in and put them in that all palette that I program. Remember, that all palette will have intensity in it as well. So what I might want to do is actually, rather than using that all palette, because I don't want the intensity this time, I want to control the intensity from my faders. Actually, I can put it in the palette. I can put it in a colour. I can put it in that position I programmed earlier. And when I'm ready, I can then start to raise the intensity over the top. So I can bring in my stage right and then my stage left. Oh, I want to make those a bit whiter so we can see them a little bit easier. And so you can see here I can start to use these building blocks and start to layer those up. Maybe I want to bring in a little bit of front light. Remember, if I want to do that, I can go to my front light group. I can then go to my positions, put them in my front light palette, and I can then start to bring that in just to add in a bit of front light. And so you can see here how we're using all of these building blocks now, and we can start to operate our show using these building blocks. I've got my time fader here on my playback fader here. I've got my various intensities here. Probably a tip worth mentioning. As soon as I start to get various fixtures programmed in, you probably want to make sure that you name everything. So always spend the time naming things, because it's probably going to save you a lot of time in the long run. So spend your time, have a USB keyboard connected to your console, go through the process, name absolutely everything as you go through. And that will then allow you to know exactly what you've got where. And of course, fundamentally, lay it out in a way that makes sense to you. If you're the one operating it, actually where it's laid out may be more useful than naming it, depending on how you operate the console. Something else you might want to consider is programming yourself some kind of get out of jail free states, if you like. So by that we mean just nice lighting states on stage, record absolutely everything onto a fader so that you know that you've got a bank of faders with just various lighting states that at any point you can fade in. So if you don't have time to program every single lighting state you're going to need for your show, well, we've got our building blocks that we can use for the most of the time, but if there are then some key lighting states we need to use, we can record those in. If you go to your record options window, I've turned it off on the external monitor so I can access it on the internal touchscreen. If I ensure Smart Tag is on, I can then record all of the required information that's on stage right now, and I can store it onto a fader. Now that I've done that, I have my playback fader here that I can use to bring up those fixtures. So I can go and take all of these intensities down, double tap clear, and I have that lighting state then on my fader. I can edit the timings of that fader if I want to. So it might be worth just building yourself up, as I said, some kind of get out of jail free states, if you like, just to help you out if you need some just lighting states that are guaranteed to get you somewhere. Now, if you're on the full size Flex, as I'm emulating here, something that you will have is your user-definable keys, your UDKs. That's these 4 keys here. Crucially, don't forget about them. They are really useful to help you speed up your programming. One of the things you can do, first of all, is you could stick a group of lights onto one of those buttons. If you're regularly using a particular group, you could configure that group onto one of your UDKs. So if I've been regularly using my group 1 in my groups window, what I could do is I could type in group 1 record and then choose an empty UDK. and I've now put that group on the UDK. So I can literally tap my group, tap home, it's going to turn those fixtures on. So that might be a useful way of using one of your UDKs as a group UDK. I could also put pallets on there, so you might find it useful to go and stick different pallets onto there. Another really useful tool to be aware of is the clear fixture UDK. If you hold setup and tap an empty UDK, you will have some extra functions that you can configure that button to be, one of which is clear fixture, which I can then click OK. So we might be used to the kind of concept of, if I go in and say 1 through 10, at, put it in a colour, put it in a position. We're quite used to the kind of concept that if we double tap clear, it will clear all manual values from our console. Well, I can use clear fixture to just clear a particular selected light. So if I repeat that again, I could say 1 through 10, at, in a colour, in a position, but actually maybe I just want to get rid of the information for my outer 2 lights. Well, I'm going to tap my clear button once, that clears the selection. I can just select the lights that I want to clear from my manual values, and I can then click my clear fixture UDK. Those fixtures are then cleared. They go back to their defaults. So you might find that the clear fixture UDK is a really useful way, a useful tool to use when you're just as a quick way to get rid of values for particular lights. Of course, what we can also do is we can record whole lighting states onto a UDK as well. So maybe you want house lights on a UDK. Tap it once, it will bring the house lights on. Maybe you want to have blinders on a UDK, or strobes, or smoke machines. Things like that. You can also record those directly onto a UDK if you want to. Now, one other thing that's worth mentioning is, do you need to think about if there's, if there's a emergency that happens in the venue, wherever you might be, will you be responsible for making sure that there is suitable lighting for people to exit the venue? If so, make sure that that's on a playback fader that you can easily access. Again, it will be down to your system. It will be down to what your particular venue is. But if you're not using your master playback fader for anything else, that might be a good use for that. Again, it's kind of that get out of jail free, but you could record something useful such as your house lights or general lighting onto that fader. Now, what we've got here is we've got kind of a bit of a two-step process in that I can push up a group and I can then go to my groups window and select those lights. Or equally, I could actually select those lights first and then push up my fader. But what about selecting a group whilst pushing up a fader? Can we do that at the same time? Well, yes, we can do, because we can program some macros. So again, it depends on your programming time. We've spent half an hour going through all of that stuff. So if you've only got half an hour, well, at least we've got some stuff now to get us started. However, if you've got more time, you might want to start to think about maybe programming some macros. And that will help you then to quickly select lights when you bring up their intensity. If you're on the full-size Flex, we can go and record our macros. You cannot customize your own macros on the Flex S consoles. So this is a Flex-only feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my internal touchscreen. I'm going to go to my macros window, automatically create macros. Everything I see in here are my fixture macros. You will see fixture macros if you're on the Flex S. So these are all of the extra functions that my fixtures can do. I can access those from my fixture macros window. As well as that, though, I can record some macros. So what I want to do is I want to record a macro that selects a particular group of lights, and I can then trigger that macro from my playbacks. So I'm going to keep things simple. I'm just going to record a group that selects... I'm going to record a macro, sorry, that selects group 1. Simple as that. So I'm going to tap record, and I'm going to tap an empty macro. I'm going to say macro 61. And it's going to say, do you want to record keys or commands? In my case here, I'm going to essentially record what I've got in my command line. So I'm going to say commands. And now, anything I tap, my macro button's flashing away at me. I can now program my macro. So I'm just going to say group 1, enter, to select that group of lights. And tap macro to finish recording. I've now got my macro here that I can click to select those lights. But what I can now do is I can now trigger that macro from my queue. So if I go and view my very first playback, which is the intensity of my first group of lights, I can then go into settings, I can go to macros, and I can indeed add a macro. And I want to add macro 61. And click OK. So now I know that when I raise my playback fader, my group of lights will select. So all I need to do now is I literally need to raise that fader. I can be viewing my Pallets desktop already. I can raise that fader. Straight away I can see everything available to those lights. And I can start to go and mix and use the different control functions. I can start to go into the effects, automatically create myself some effects, and I can tap an effect and that will start to fade in as well. So if you've got the time, it might be worth programming those kind of macros too, so that you can use macros to, so that you can trigger a macro from a queue that then automatically selects those lights for you. So all of this, what we've done, or what we've kind of worked through there, that's kind of on the basis that maybe we're coming to a venue from a completely afresh. We've done kind of no prep at all. If you're touring, that's a little bit different, because if you've been touring, you are going to have a lot of prep work with you. So let's just talk about a little bit about touring. If you're touring, you've probably got a very large show file with you that's got all of your information. And I would recommend programming that kind of default show file with really kind of the most complex fixtures you think you're going to come across. Because what you can then do is if you come to a venue that has simpler fixtures, you can go and select your particular group of lights in the fixture schedule and you can change. You can then change that type of light in your show for the simpler fixture. You can go and search and find whatever that simpler fixture may be. And that will then apply all of your programming that you've done with your original complex fixtures in your show file, and it will all be applied to the new fixtures. And so that means that, you know, you're just going to probably need to update a few pallets and you're then ready to go with the new lights. If you use simpler lights and then go and try and change them to more complex lights, well, of course, when you program the simpler lights, the more advanced features weren't there. And so the console won't have any information for those more complex lights. So as a kind of a tip, it's a good idea to program your show file with, as I said, kind of the most complex lights you think you're going to come across. Because that will then mean that when you're changing to the exact light that the next venue has, as much programming will be applied to the new fixture as possible. What you might also come across when touring is you might have programmed your show with 8 lights, as I've got in here, but actually in a new venue, the new venue might have 16 lights rather than 8 for that particular scenario. These are my LED cyc lights, for example. maybe you come to a venue that actually has twice the number of LED site lights as you'd programmed in. Well, one option that you could do is you could add additional addresses. I could go in to a particular fixture and I could actually go and say that this fixture has, I need to control 2 fixtures on 2 different addresses, all from one fixture number in my console. So I could go and add an additional address. It could be on a different universe. So let's say that actually this fixture is on universe 8, for example, and DMX address 1. And I can then add as additional. And now my fixture 28 on my console, when I control it, intensity information, color information, that is getting sent to this fixture on this address, but also this fixture on this address too. It's kind of being routed to 2 fixtures simultaneously. So instantly all programming that I'd done with this fixture is now being routed to the same type of fixture but on a different address. So that might be something that's worth doing as well if you're touring, for example, and you need to apply your programming to extra lights. And of course, something that we can do as well is update our pallets. When you go into a new venue, your pallet that you used for centre stage, chances are you're going to need to update it. But if you do update that pallet, any playbacks that you'd programmed that used that pallet will have updated it automatically for you. And that's called pallet referencing. So if you programmed your cues using a pallet, you can then happily update that pallet, and it will also update the cues as well within that pallet. As I said, kind of a tip to be aware of course, is name everything. Spend that bit of extra time naming all of your lighting states, and that way you'll know exactly what you've got where. Kind of a last thing to mention then is also have a think about your accessories. Have a think about what accessories you might want. So if you're someone that likes to program all of your options onto faders, you've got loads and loads of different playbacks that you've gone and configured in there, you might want to think about wings. You might want to think about adding fader wings to your console. The ZerOS wing is a bank of 24 faders that can either be channels or playbacks. So if you're finding, well, the physical faders on your console, you're always having to page all the time, and actually you just need more physical faders, you might want to think about adding a wing to your console. Another thing, as I've already mentioned, is if you do want to go down that route of setting up a remote network, have a think about having kind of a dedicated laptop, really. A dedicated laptop that you can use with your console. Nice compact laptop maybe it's got a touchscreen. Just a kind of a dedicated show laptop, if you like, that you can use to remotely control your console. Really useful for that patching process, as I mentioned earlier. You can walk around your venue with your laptop and you're remotely programming your console. Of course, make sure you've got a USB stick for doing your show backups. That's also really important. And also, it's probably a good good way of approaching it is probably to program loads of different show files. Don't just keep overwriting kind of one master show file. Actually just record lots of show files. They don't take up very much space on your USB stick. And having all of those different show files named accordingly, it allows you to go back to one if you need to, giving you those options that you might need. If you're on the full-size Flex, go and plug in a USB desk light as well. You've got on the full-size Flex, you've got a USB port on the front. You might want to consider getting yourself a USB desk light for that if you want to. And as I've already mentioned, probably one of the most useful is a USB keyboard. Make sure you've got a nice backlit, preferably, little compact USB keyboard that you can use with your console for your naming of cues. And so that is kind of our little explore, if you like, into programming your console with limited time. I hope it's been useful. I hope you've there's been some bits that you can kind of take away from that and use for your programming. As I said, I've kind of approached this from you've got a fresh console. How do you get a show running in limited programming time? And so we've looked at fundamentally getting ourselves lots of building blocks programmed in. We've spoken about the fact that we could use some intensity masters that we can then apply our pallets over the top of. We talked a little bit about programmer time that we can then use to fade between pallets. And we also spoke about some more maybe advanced stuff, so programming macros to select lights automatically. Getting some user-definable keys configured on our Flex console for quickly selecting lights as well. So I hope that's been useful. And if you've got any questions at all, please do drop us an email, support@zero88.com. And if you've got any tips, as I mentioned, put them in the comments. Some others might find those really useful. So thank you for joining, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next session. Bye-bye.